I've been lifting for over 10 years, and in that time, I can confidently say I've put on over 30 pounds of muscle, and I've gained and lost well over 100 pounds. So here's some things I've learned, how you can streamline your muscle building process and get to your ideal physique as fast as possible. Now, the first thing I want to say is that I think a lot of the hacks that you see in this industry to improve muscle growth, increase muscle growth, are kind of scams. I think the only thing that you can do, and this is kind of sad, is blunt or mess up your muscle growth. You're kind of very limited in terms of how much muscle you can grow, especially after your first few years, which we'll get into, but it significantly diminishes off. You gain about 10 pounds of muscle the first year is a good estimate, 5 pounds the year after, and then less and less and less until you're gaining maybe a few pounds a year. Jeff Nipper just did a video where he gained about 5 pounds of lean mass in his last year, but lean mass also includes things like organs too, so it's a little bit hard to tell how much muscle you're gaining. Point being is that I think the main things that you can do to prevent yourself from gaining as much muscle as possible is not hit your nutrient requirements, not get enough protein, and get injured along the way. All of which I will discuss. I think a lot of the hacks that people advertise and like the optimal movements are probably almost meaningless in terms of how much more muscle you can grow. I do think there's obviously benefit to a good program, and I think there are small incremental positions where you can optimize and get a little bit more muscle growth, but the question and the jury is still out there as far as how much of a difference that makes. But there are big things that you can do to not mess up and not blunt your own muscle growth. So here it is, and here are some things and mistakes I've made along the way. So first, where I started, I remember I was in my room watching Jersey Shore. I was probably like 10 years old. And I told my parents I wanted to be as big as Ronnie, who's this big steroided out dude. Clearly have not gotten there. Clearly will never get there. And that's fine. But I was probably around 10, started lifting seriously, wrote my first program summer of freshman year. And that's over 10 years ago, probably about 11 or 12 at this point. And I really had no idea what I was doing. My first program was literally just write every single exercise you can possibly come up with into a program for each body part essentially, and then the next day do the next part, and then the next day do the next part. So it was a 3-day rotating split with like 15 exercises, probably like 3 sets of 10. I have it written out somewhere, and probably the worst thing I possibly could have done, because you don't need much when you first start other than to avoid getting injured. But because that wasn't enough, I then added Insanity, which for anyone knows is an old Beachbody program where you do like a lot of high intensity interval training, cardio work. And that was in order to get toned because, I was going to get bulky, of course, from all of the lifting I was doing. But I need to get toned too. So I had to get toned. So I would go home after the Insanity workouts, after running a bit too, probably because it's running to and from the gym at the time, training for cross country. And I got super depressed after about a few weeks. My body just couldn't handle it. I muscled through a couple of the Insanity workouts for a few weeks. And then I would just sit there watching him do it, watching Sean T lead everyone through it, as I was just like, I am so depressed. Part of that is definitely from overtraining. Part of that is definitely from undernutrition. But so over that time, over learning through years, following a bunch of different programs, and iterating, training a bunch of people at this point, training myself, writing a bunch of different programs on my own, I've learned a lot. So let's start with some misconceptions that I think are fun to talk about. So the body archetypes, we've got the ectomorph, which some would still consider me an ectomorph, probably skinny, mesomorph, ripped, kind of bulky, and endomorph. I think these are made up, but I do think there is truth and there is some logic as how you should approach your lifting journey based on your archetype. If you are an ectomorph or if you're listening to this, you're probably not a mesomorph because you're already ripped. So really ectomorph, you're skinny, endomorph, you're overweight. If you're an ectomorph, I think the main thing you should do is just focus on the gym. Make sure you're getting enough protein, which will come back to nutrition later, and don't get in the way of your own results. Go to the gym consistently, figure out a routine and frequency that you can hit reliably every week. Even if it's just 2 days a week, you're going to gain so much muscle because of newbie gains. You have so much potential. And the only thing that's important at this point for you is to One, keep going to the gym. Don't get in your own way. Make sure you're recovering, sleeping, blah, blah, blah. And two, eat enough so that you are fueling your own muscle growth. Even if you don't eat enough to gain weight, you will still gain a ton of muscle, but you are in this period where you can just luck out, gain a ton of muscle in a very short amount of time, and that is like a year. But 10 pounds can make a huge difference. So don't F yourself over here. Eat enough food. Make sure you're not losing weight is the biggest thing, and you will gain a lot of muscle. If you're an endomorph, honestly, my advice is kind of the same, because you're going to see huge changes in body composition during this beginning phase. So you'll gain a lot of muscle and lose a decent amount of fat at the same time, and you are kind of primed to do this. But if you do want to lose some fat, that is fine. You will probably not see a significant reduction in the amount of muscle you would have grown anyway, and you probably also have a little bit more muscle than your ectomorph friend, because people tend to carry more muscle with more mass in general. So if you look at an obese person, generally, not always, but they usually carry more muscle than the skinny person next to them, partially because they just have to walk around carrying a lot more load, right? So their bones are a little bit more dense, their leg muscles and other things are a bit bigger. Not always. And generally, they've just been in a more anabolic building environment for years, so they have put on some more tissue incidentally in the process, where the ectomorph, if you're super skinny, very likely that you may have been under eating, and so your body hasn't had that additional calories or energy to allocate towards more muscle growth. So you very likely lack muscle. I think, again, the point I'm coming back to here is I think it's just really important to try and maintain your weight either way. Again, if you want to try and build a little bit of muscle and gain a little weight as an ectomorph, or lose a little bit as an endomorph, that's fine. The issue is that you haven't built any skill as far as maintaining your weight, and this is probably the first time you'll track calories or even look at anything nutritionally. This is the first time I added a protein shake and all of the digestive and GI issues that come with that. And you just don't want to get in your own way, because that is the main thing, the main con that you can do here. You can really get in your own way if you're not eating enough, or you're starving yourself as that endomorph trying to get skinny. All you want to do is take advantage of this first year where you're going to put on a ridiculous amount of muscle, and you're going to come out looking very different as a result if you don't get in your own way. The next thing, don't write your own program. As I mentioned before, the program I just outlined is probably the worst program I could have possibly written. I literally may as well have just asked ChatGPT for every exercise you could possibly do in the gym, and then did it. You, like, as a beginner, again, not much standing in your way. Any stimulus that you create, it can be compound movements, it can be more bodybuilder style isolation movements. It's all probably going to be enough to maximally stimulate muscle growth at the point to which your body can feasibly put on muscle. What I mean by that is, when you do a bench press as an advanced lifter, there's very likely going to be one limiting factor in the movement. For example, what I mean here is, if I'm pressing, it's my pecs that are giving out and not allowing me to get any more reps. Or maybe it's my triceps at the lockout position, and that's why I can't get any more reps, or my delts. And so as you get more advanced, you have to get more specific. But right now, everything is going to be, what's actually limiting you is very likely your own form, your coordination, your ability to coordinate the movement, especially as you get into a fatigued state. So the only thing that really matters is, again, continuing to lift consistently and improving on your form week over week. You are also not objective. I think in general, people don't write the best programs for themselves. This is myself included, and is one reason I look forward to working with a coach in the future. Back to that concept of beginner versus intermediate and advanced, and this kind of relates into the ectomorph versus endomorph conversation. For beginners, nothing matters. You don't have any skill, but this doesn't really matter, because you can do anything and you'll gain muscle. And that's why, like, swimmers gain a decent amount of muscle when they start swimming. This could be a different reason, but why even runners gain some muscle when they first start running, because they don't need much of a stimulus. The more advanced you get, as you progress into intermediate, which typically takes about 2 years, advanced 5 to 10 years, you need to get more and more specific with the stimulus that you're putting on your body. So beginner, focus on finding exercises that fit you. This was a big mistake that I made. I tried for years to barbell squat. At least a high bar barbell squat. I might try barbell squat again, mostly for funsies at some point in the future, now that I know a lot more. And I would probably wear heel wedges, which will come back to your squat shoes. I tried to barbell squat for years and it just doesn't fit me. I can't get all the way down. I look like a baby giraffe, as I've said a million times. And exercises don't matter. Like, doesn't matter if you do a standing bicep curl or a cable curl or whatever. All that matters is that you train elbow flexion. So I need to figure out a way that I can comfortably, safely load the elbow flexion so I can overload my biceps over time. I need to figure out a way to overload my chest muscles via adduction and, a little bit of scapular protraction and probably a little bit of, humeral elevation. These are all fancy terms for I need to lengthen, stretch, and then shorten my pec. So taking it through a full range of motion comfortably. That could be via a bench press with a barbell, could be via dumbbell, could be with a machine. The exercise itself, there's no exercise that actually matters. All that matters for the sake of muscle growth is finding exercises that allow you to safely take your muscle through a full range of motion and overload that over time. This is where certain exercises are very limiting. Let's say I did squat very well, but I decided for whatever reason to squat on a Bosu ball. Because of the inherent stability demands where I'm trying to balance myself, I won't really be able to take my muscles to failure, at least to the same degree on which I could on a more stable surface like the flat ground, because I'm concentrating so much and my brain is trying to coordinate, how do I not fall? How do I not fall? Now, this is kind of where you get there are some advanced people that might be able to do a decent amount of weight on a Bosu ball squat. And because they're so skilled enough at that movement, it actually doesn't matter as much that they're choosing a less stable one. And this goes with things like the Olympic lifts, barbell squatting, barbell bench pressing, sometimes deadlifting. A lot of the more complex compound movements that you see are weighted pull-ups is a good one, where they just have so much skill because they've spent 5-10 years doing this that the instability of the movement doesn't really affect them. It's really, in my opinion, the intermediates that get screwed with this because they don't have the skill where they can cleanly barbell squat to close to failure or any of the other movements I just mentioned. But they also may not be getting the stimulus to maximize muscle growth because they don't have that skill yet. So generally, I always opt for highly stable movements that allow you to take your muscle through a full range of motion. This is why I almost exclusively, I use a pendulum squat now. You don't need that. Or a hack squat. Both are great if you have them, but allows me to get hamstring on calves, full knee flexion. That's actually how I decide whether or not to join a gym, whether or not they have a hack squat or pendulum squat. At this point in my life, though, I would be pretty fine with a Smith machine squat because it's stable. It allows me to change my center of mass and push it enough forward that I can still get that hamstring on calf motion where I wouldn't be able to with a barbell squat because of how my limbs and bones, my bone structure, how they're oriented such that I really cannot get an ATG ass to grass squat. And this goes for basically every movement. You want to focus on the range of motion less than the exercise that you choose to apply through that range of motion. For example, I remember I was lifting 80-pound dumbbells and like a shoulder press at one point, like a wide grip press, and my form was pretty terrible. I was lifting like out here and severely compromising my range of motion because you can get much deeper if you go a little bit lower. And I remember learning this and I had to swallow my pride one day and go down to like 55s or maybe 65s and improve my range of motion, increase my range of motion, because the goal isn't to necessarily move as heavy of a load as possible. The goal is to overload a muscle through its range of motion if you're trying to lift as much weight as possible. If you're a power lifter where the goal is to move as much weight as possible, if you're trying to gain as much muscle as possible. If you're a power lifter where if the goal is to move as much load as possible, then the goal shifts to how can I reduce the range of motion so I don't have to produce as much force, which is why you see powerlifters bench press with this huge arch. So all they have to do is lift the barbell 2 inches off the ground. The more thoracic mobility you have, the higher you can arch your back and stay on the pad, means the less work you have to do, which means you can lift more without having the requisite muscle or skill or strength that are needed to do it. It's kind of like cheating, if you will, but obviously that's the rules of the game. So I'm not naysaying anything to powerlifters. That's the game they play. That is not necessarily going to result in the most muscle growth. And frankly, if you are a powerlifter, I would still highly recommend doing more, let's say, optimal bodybuilding movements, because the greatest predictor of powerlifting success, and they've shown this through like taking a bunch of powerlifters, putting them through a DEXA scan, the ones with the most muscle mass win almost time and time again. It's the most accurate predictor of whether or not, or which powerlifter will win, how much muscle they have. So strength and size are very synonymous in that aspect. The other thing that's important is finding exercises that you enjoy so you stick with them. As much I enjoy pursuing like the optimal things, like the very 1% things that make my joints feel a lot better. I also struggled with a lot of injuries early on in my career. So I had to figure out, why does my elbow hurt when I do this? Why does I herniate a disc in my back? Like, how can I lift through this or work around this? And if you don't enjoy the movements that you're doing, at the end of the day, you're very unlikely to stick to them. But you don't have to do the optimal things. I have a friend who was always way bigger than me. Still is. Absolute beast. And he has recently gotten into more of the optimal things because he's starting to see less progress on doing the big three, like squat, bench, deadlift, doing more of the bro lifts, dips, things like that. But it's also because he's an advanced lifter, and it's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, he didn't need to do what I wanted to do or thought was more optimal to get the results that he's gotten. So if you enjoy these exercises, then stick with them, because you will stick with them. And that is what's going to result in the most progress long term. I have been lifting. I don't think I look like I've been lifting for 11 years. Maybe if you saw my progress photos, which I'm going to post on Instagram sometime this week, hopefully, you'd be like, okay, well, I can see he's gained a fair bit of muscle. But it's, enjoyment is such a key factor for sticking with this long term. And sticking with this long term is how you grow the most muscle. It's a very slow game. As I mentioned before, like, I don't think a lot of these muscle building hacks are really going to add pounds to your biceps or your glutes. If you're a woman, they might make small marginal increases, which do count and add up, but there's nothing that's going to, testosterone you to 10 pounds of muscle in a year after your first year, or besides anabolic steroids. Okay, nutrition. So I think this is so neglected because I was only focused on lifting. And I think that if you are eating enough calories such that you are at least maintaining your weight, you are primarily, hopefully, eating carbs to fuel your workouts. It's crazy how much my workouts are suffering when I, of recently, haven't been getting food around my workout. I'm just exhausted and dragging myself through it by the end. But if I eat within a few hours of going to work out, either before working out, I'll be much more fueled. So make sure you're getting enough carbs to fuel your workout, get enough fat, and not too much fat, and get enough protein. You want to do 0.82 grams per pound of lean body mass. You can do the naval body fat calculator to get an idea of what your lean body mass is. I personally just do 0.82 grams per pound. I'm very happy to get more protein than I need. I just in generally like protein. I think it makes me feel good, but 0.82 grams, you could probably do 0.6 per pound of your current body weight, and that'll get you in the ballpark of 0.82 grams per pound of lean body mass. If you do have a lot of weight to lose, you are in the higher thresholds of BMI, you will definitely want to do a body fat calculator and see what your lean body mass is, because there can be a huge disparity with how much protein the grams per pound calculates versus the grams per pound of lean body mass, because you have a lot of fat mass. The second thing I think you should do is maintain your weight for a while and then bulk. The reason I say this, and I didn't do this, I bulked and then cut and then bulked and then cut and then bulked and then cut, is that muscle growth, whether or not you want to believe it or not, whether or not you want to just run through the wall and say, that doesn't apply to me. I'm going to grow as much muscle. The harder I lift, the more muscle I'm going to gain. Sure, you can come back to me in 10 years and maybe tell me I'm right, or maybe I'm wrong, at least in your case scenario. But bulking, I think, should look very much like maintenance, because especially after a year or two of lifting, you should be trying to gain at most 8 pound a month, which would be 12 pounds of muscle per year, which is a great year for muscle growth. But what that translates to is about 3,500 extra calories per day or per month, because a pound is about 3,500 calories, which translates to about 100 calories extra a day. The thing where it gets even more complicated is that the more calories you eat, your metabolism adapts to it. So even if you're eating 100 calories above what was your maintenance, you might not gain that equivalent amount. So people end up gaining a ton of body fat, and this is very much directed at myself, getting really fat, not putting on that much muscle, spending a good amount of time cutting, in which they could have just continued to be in a build phase, and then just do this loop there and back. So that is what I'm doing this time around after being very sick or getting very sick of this cutting and bulking cycle. I got down to leanest body fat I've ever been at, which is cool with most muscle. I'm going to spend the next 3 years, hopefully more, maybe less if I mess up sometimes in the way, trying to gain about a half pound per month and just slowly gain weight. So, to many, this might look like very tedious, but to me, it's just like, hey, I'm trying to essentially maintain my weight and just add muscle very slowly over time, which is kind of the price you pay at this point in my career, where it's just like, I'm not going to gain 12 pounds of muscle in a year. Very unlikely. But even if I do, like, I can probably, I'll still be gaining 6 pounds, which is pretty solid. And also I won't have to spend as much. I won't be spending any time really cutting is the goal. So that means I'm spending more time in a muscle growth phase with a little bit of added calories. And, there's always a possibility I end up messing up a little bit along the way, gaining more like a pound a month or 3/4 pound or maybe a quarter pound a month. So it'll be a super interesting journey to kind of take this slow and steady approach, but I'm super excited for it because it's just going to kind of look like my day to day, and I'm going to be able to live my life the way I want to, hopefully not be as stressed about going out and things like that, and figure out how to have a more relaxed way of living. Cause this is kind of just like, I'm not really looking at this as like a bulk, because it is obviously, but it's such a long winded timeline that even a year or two ago, I could never have imagined. So it's just going to be kind of like living at maintenance, and I'm just trying to gain a very small amount of muscle and weight each month, which, ends up being about 1,750 calories. Again, how we actually do that's going to be a little bit complicated because your body adapts. So I'll probably end up being maybe 100 calories over where I think my maintenance is, and hopefully my body only adapts to half of that. We're going to be working out this with Kathleen, probably do a whole podcast on that. That'll be super fun. Kathleen, the people miss you, by the way. Everyone has been saying, I love the podcast you do with Kathleen. I'm like, I know, me too. We'll get her back on. We are building some things out for the next round of Transform. We've been done grinding. And for any dudes out there, we do have a Transform men's group, not coming until next year, very likely, but we see you. We know you guys are out there, and we want to get you on this too. But we're just making sure that we have a great product for everyone, make sure everyone's satisfied, and we want to do that as we continue to expand. The other thing is that you have way less muscle than you think. This has been a very painful lesson that I've learned, but I visually remember my old boss when I was at like 200 plus pounds, maybe like 210, 215. I think I was in the middle of a cut, and he was like, yeah, you'd have to get to like 175 to be shredded. And I was so butthurt. I was like, dude, what? Like, who does he think he is? I know way more about the stuff, which I did, I think at the time, still do, but couldn't have been more accurate. Because now I'm 175, and I would probably say that I'm shredded at this point. And the harsh part about that is just I had gained way less muscle than I thought I did. I just really gained a ton of fat in that 8 months. Who knew that Haagen-Dazs for breakfast would not bode well for gaining as much muscle as you can? But your muscle growth is such a slow process, and you can try and rush it as much as you can. The best way to get it as fast as you can is, the whole slow is fast, fast is slow. Maybe gain a pound a month. Even if you gain 3 pounds of fat, 6 pounds of fat, that will only take you like 2 to 3 weeks to cut off. So you can spend 11 months in the year bulking and 1 month of the year cutting, doing a pretty aggressive cut. the other advantage to that. And I think that's just such a huge advantage because people don't talk about the negative effects of having to spend a lot of time cutting. Like if I am gaining 2 pounds a month, which was might even be less than what I was gaining for a lot of the time, and more than half of that is fat. Let's just say 50% of that is fat. I gained 24 pounds in a year. Now I have to spend, I just spent 8 weeks losing 22 pounds. So I would be 2 pounds heavier. Hopefully I've lost all that fat, a little bit more. So probably about 4 to 5 weeks losing fat. And that's assuming you're in a very aggressive deficit. Historically, and how most bodybuilders do it, they don't do a very aggressive deficit. They do like 300 to 500 calories, which means you're in a calorie deficit for, let's say a pound is 3,500 calories. That means like a pound a week. So that could mean, just to get back to where you started, you're spending 12 weeks to cut off all that fat that you gained during the bulking phase, assuming you gained 12 pounds of muscle, which again would be a lot if you're not a very beginner, which means you spent 3/4 of the year bulking, 1/4 of the year cutting. The other caveat here is we're also assuming that you only lost fat mass in that cut, which you probably mostly lost fat mass, but you also probably lost some muscle mass, which means you're kind of taking a step backwards in that light. And there's no way to completely avoid that, obviously, besides lifting throughout the cut, trying to stay as strong as you can, and hitting enough protein. But I think the less we can cut in general, the healthier you'll be, the higher your metabolism will be. You'll just start to feel better. I mean, this is what we talk about time and time again with Transform, Master Maintenance, all the stuff we have is just like building your metabolism, keeping it high, and putting on muscle in the process. So one of the things that's really hard at any point in your lifting career is gauging how much muscle you're gaining, because again, it's such a slow process, painfully slow process. And I think the only way to overcome that is to track your lifts and take measurements of your size. So you want to take, measure your biceps, measure your quads, measure anything that you want to see changes in, but also make sure you measure your waist. And I would do your neck too, so you can get a body fat percentage calculator. We can talk more about body fat, but it's useful because if you use the naval body fat thing, it's always going to be the same. Like your neck circumference is probably not going to be that different. It might change a little bit. It might gain a little bit of fat, a little bit of size as you gain fat. As you lose fat, lose a little bit. But that formula doesn't change, so it will always be consistently accurate. And that will tell you, okay, if I added 2 pounds or 2 inches to my biceps, but I'm 40 pounds heavier and I'm at 20% higher body fat, which may have happened at one point, probably not that high, but I might have gained zero muscle. It's just all fat sitting on my arms. So if I have the relative relationship, the paired metric of, okay, let me look at the body fat percentage, and then I'm also going to compare the size of my biceps so I can see the size of my bicep at different body fat percentage, and then see if this is working. Bingo, you've got a great metric to tell if you're making progress. Again, these are useful because muscle growth is so slow, so you want to have some objective things to say, okay, month over month, probably quarterly, honestly, is what I would recommend to take measurements. Like that specific, if you're going to measure your calf, your quad, and hopefully have someone do it. Or you can get one of those Amazon things where you just wrap it around your leg and it kind of retracts. That would probably be better, so you don't have the variable of how tight you're making it. But that'll give you a really good idea of, are you progressing over time? Is this working? The other thing that you want to do is you just want to find ways to consistently get stronger. As we mentioned before with the whole powerlifter thing, strength is the biggest predictor of muscle growth or muscle size. The biggest predictor of strength, as we mentioned before with the whole powerlifting thing, the biggest predictor of strength is the amount of muscle mass you have. And I think we can reverse correlate that to the stronger you get, the more muscle mass you will have. So if we just focus on getting stronger in the, let's say 5+ rep range, that's pretty much a guarantee that you are putting on muscle. The reason I say the 5+ rep range is because I think 4 still would count into that. I just wouldn't aim for 4. And certain lifts and exercises are more catered to lower versus higher reps. It's really hard to do a 3-rep lunge because it's very unstable. But there's a huge skill component and neural component, your brain, to lower rep lifts that are very not necessary, and you might not be recruiting your muscle to its fullest extent in that one lift. Here's a great analogy for how I like to imagine muscle recruitment. Muscle recruitment being the amount of muscle that's turned on in a given exercise or set. I paint this like a battery. So if your muscle has a battery, or if your muscle was a battery, and we do a 20 rep set to failure, each rep is about 5% of the battery you're draining. If we do a 10 rep set to failure, each rep is about 10%. So it's 10, 20%, 30%, 10 reps is empty. The thing is, that's not exactly how it works, because you're never going to fully drain the battery. What I mean by this is that, and again, this is a huge skill component, is that just at 20 reps, you may still have had 4.95% battery remaining on your 20, trying to get your 21st rep, but you needed that extra 5%. So you didn't, that 0.05% or whatever I just said, to complete that last rep. So you failed at 20. At 10 reps, you may have had 9% remaining, but you needed that extra percent to get the 10th rep. So you couldn't do it. The lower you get in reps, the more percent each rep takes. So you are theoretically possibly getting further and further away from failure. Obviously, there is the possibility that you have the exact perfect load, so that at 5 reps or 4 reps, that you are perfectly draining your muscle and hitting it to its maximal extent. But like, the odds are getting slimmer and slimmer. And again, there's a huge neural coordination component to these lower rep exercises, 1, 2, 3, 4, that you will get better at with time, or if you train it directly like powerlifters do. But it's just not necessary. And I think personally, there might be some benefit. I might retract this later on. There might be some benefit to like doing those lower rep sets to failure. I've been incorporating some speed work, which I think kind of does the same thing in my warm-ups, just doing things as fast as possible, because that's largely driven by your brain's ability to coordinate your muscles as fast as possible. But it's a skill that you probably don't have if you're beginner, intermediate, or possibly even an advanced bodybuilder who's never really pushed in the low rep range. And I don't necessarily see it as a skill that you should acquire. I think it's probably just taking effort and fatigue away from actually muscle building exercises. So track measurements, track that you're progressing over time. Menno Henselman has this concept of like key lifts that he never takes out of the program, or he'll always reflect back on. So if you have just like a standing barbell curl that you always come back to, and that's your test lift, that you say, okay, am I getting stronger on this? But you do bicep curls or dumbbells or cables or hammer curls, and you come back to that test lift, the barbell bicep curl or whatever you choose it to be, and you've gotten stronger. Pretty good indication that you've gained muscle, because you haven't been practicing that skill component of the exercise. You haven't been actually doing barbell bicep curls, but you've gotten stronger at it, which would lead you to indicate that even though you're not as coordinated as you may have been at barbell bicep curls specifically, you gained enough muscle that it compensated for you to actually get stronger at the movement, despite not having practiced it. Because when you first start doing an exercise, the first few weeks, as you get a lot stronger very quickly, that is almost always a neural component. You are getting more skilled at doing the exercise. You're not sadly adding the equivalent of putting on 10 pounds of muscle, or the added muscle needed to lift an extra 10 pounds each week. And that is a great leeway, that's not the right word, but into how often you should change up exercises. So when I was first lifting and following someone's program, I was convinced that if you plateaued for more than 2 or 3 weeks, you should change up the lifts. And I think this is kind of irrelevant. Like, you can, but the issue is so many people never actually get skilled at doing the movement, so that they're just always jumping around. So they're never really building that coordination to the point where they can really train to muscular failure. So if you haven't been able to progress on a rep, like by a single rep, for let's say 3 to 4 weeks, then it's probably time to start considering. What I recommend everyone do is use the double progression method. So go up in reps, choose a rep range anywhere between, it could be 5 to 30, or what I would typically do is like more like 6 to 9, 5 to 8, somewhere along those lines, 8 to 12 maybe. Go up in reps as far as you can, and then increase in weight. And then you'll be down at the bottom of the rep range and do that again. It's a very safe way to continue to progress over time. And once you've really stalled out and that you've maxed out the amount of you're just not seeing any progress, then it's probably time to change things up. What I would look for to change things up is doing a comparable exercise, but not, you don't need to get anything too fancy. But if you're doing a standing bicep curl that's like more neutral grip here, maybe change to something externally rotated or more in a shortened position or a lengthened position, a stretch position, to possibly change up the muscle fibers that you are recruiting. Kathleen and I have been talking about this a lot recently, where a lot of muscle fibers, and I didn't completely know this honestly, or at least I forgot, that not all of your muscle fibers run from insertion to origin, so they don't run the full length. So I believe that regional hypertrophy is very likely possible. I think it would kind of, I really think it is possible. I kind of doubt that it's not. I'll probably be yelled at for that take. But the reason I say that is just I think that certain muscle fibers are going to be put in a better position to work in certain positions based on their structure. So if we take that, and if that's true, which like everyone since the beginning of bodybuilding has known there's lower chest exercises versus upper chest exercises. The question is like, how specific does it get? And some people don't even agree that you can target the upper versus lower chest. But like, to me, if we're moving up here for the upper chest and down here for the lower chest, like at what point is this almost considered two different muscles or three different muscles? The delts, for example, have like, some people have 11 heads of the delts. So there's certain divisions. So switching up like which area you're targeting, the rotation of the joint, maybe doing a low row for the lats versus a high, like a pull down for the lats, keeping it tight, will just kind of hit different heads of the muscle and hopefully keep you progressing, so that when you come back to, let's say, that standing bicep curl or the barbell curl we were mentioning before, maybe that long head of the biceps was limiting you, and now it's actually a short head. So obviously this is hard to tell, but maybe doing more of an internally rotated variation will help that, and just kind of keep cycling through those things. Or maybe doing a hammer curl where you're hitting more to the brachialis, do that. I think anatomy is so underrated and so important. It's like probably the one thing you should learn if you're lifting, because anatomy is what matters, not like the names of exercises or anything fancy like that. It's just like, how can I bring the origin of this muscle to its insertion while lining up a resistance, whether it's cables, machines, free weights, whatever, appropriately with that line of resistance, that line of pull. And now we've got the important conversation of volume and frequency. It's pretty hard to overtrain unless you're doing really stupid things like training every exercise in the book and then also doing insanity. As long as you're fueling properly and then not doing a ton of other things. I am very guilty of overtraining, but that's because I like to snowboard and then also train really hard and then also do cardio and do a bunch of other stupid stuff that I would never recommend anyone do. But if you are lifting 6 days a week and just getting enough steps otherwise and don't have a ton of stress on your plate, you're probably not going to overtrain. Overtraining is a very systemic issue. So if you are just absolutely blown out, you're not recovering, you're sleeping like crap, these are important things to consider. You're very unlikely to just overtrain your biceps because your muscles can typically handle a lot of load. If you are getting a overtraining issue with your bicep, like a frequency overuse issue, we'll come back to that in a second, but that's probably more either your execution or the movement not agreeing with you. Don't be redundant. This is something I've kind of changed my mind on a little bit recently, but there's no reason to do a standing bicep curl and then with a barbell and then with an easy bar and then with a dumbbell, which is exactly what my first program was written up. They're literally all loading the muscle in the same position. They essentially just have different names. If you're going to do multiple muscles or multiple exercises for a muscle, again, at least do it in like different positions, overloaded different positions. So you might overload the stretch in one, overload the shortened position in one, even if they look the same. Like theoretically, if you did a cable preacher curl with it in front of you, you'll overload the shortened position. But if you do dumbbell preacher curl, you'll overload more of the length and mid-range. So those, even though they are literally the same exercise, just changing the implement would get you a lot more versus, again, the barbell versus easy curl versus dumbbell or even cable standing curl, all doing the exact same thing. So don't be redundant. I used to think that you shouldn't. There was no reason to train multiple exercises for a muscle group once you cover the full range of motion. For example, like I would do a leg extension to hit the quads in their shortened position and then a squat to hit more of their lengthened position. And I thought that was fine. And I would still agree with this. Like, I don't think there's necessarily any point in hitting a barbell squat and then a hack squat, unless you have like specific reasons for doing that. Like you need to train the barbell squat for powerlifting reasons, or that's just a goal of yours to get as strong as possible in that movement. And then you're going to go to a more stable variation to really get yourself to muscular failure. With volume, I don't really have a good answer to this one. I think you should kind of push as much volume as you can with the amount of time you're willing to spend in the gym and are able to recover from. Again, that relates back to the overtraining conversation we had earlier, but I think there's a good amount of research, and it seems what everyone is saying for the most part is that the more volume you do, the more muscle you grow. Now, here's the caveat here that a lot of people on the other side don't acknowledge. After 2 sets, like the amount of muscle you're growing for each additional set is it's very minimal. I was recently listening to a podcast that said after 11 sets, you actually statistically cannot measure the difference in muscle growth. So that's a big difference between 2 and 11. But if you're someone that doesn't want to spend all day in the gym, they're just trying to like eventually like continue to progress, probably stick to like the 2 sets, do like a full body workout 2-3 times a week, get in, get out, 45 minutes, 50 minutes. That's all you need to do. If you're someone that's trying to max out muscle growth, take advantage of more volume, spend a little bit more time in the gym, but also use smart things. And I would do this either way, like supersets. If you can, I'm a huge pain in the gym. I jump back and forth between multiple exercises. Super excited to train at home now because my dad has a gym, so I can just I can hog everything. But I train in my apartment gym when no one's there. Like I orient my whole day so I can go be a pain in the ass in the gym and also avoid traffic. But so try and hop back and forth between different exercises because you're not fully recovered. But for the same exercise, let me give a more concrete example here. If I were to do 3 sets of, if we equate this, as long as you hit the same volume across a week, it doesn't seem to matter in terms of muscle growth. So just like the same sets and reps with the same weight, right? So volume, sets, reps, weight is the total volume. If you calculate that, multiply those all together. But you will be able to do more volume if you give more rest between each set. So like you could just do a set of bicep curls, wait around for 3 minutes, and then do another set, versus if you did 3 sets back to back to back, you might get, let's say, 10 reps the first set, 8 reps the second set, 6 reps the third set if you wait like a minute, versus you might be able to do 10 reps the first set of the bicep curls, wait 3 minutes, do 10 reps the second set, and then maybe 9 or 8 the third set. But that's a lot of time sitting around. So what I would suggest doing, and that's what I used to do, because I was willing to do everything to gain as much muscle as possible, is hit a set of bicep curls, wait a minute so your heart rate comes down, especially if you're cardiovascularly conditioned. And this also depends on the exercise. You're going to have to wait more after deadlifts than you will after like a set of bicep curls. Go hit something next to it, or just change the cable, hit some triceps, and then hit some middle delts. And now you've had 3 minutes to rest between each set of the bicep curls, so you can get more volume, but you spent the same amount of time hitting all those movements as long as you're cardiovascularly conditioned. And again, even if you're not cardiovascularly conditioned, you'd still save more time and get more volume out of this by taking a 90-second break, or even possibly 2 minutes. And again, how winded are you going to get from a set of cable lateral raises? So that's what I do. I just change up the cables like 1,000 times, and I use a ton of cable exercises, or I'll go back and forth between calf raises and deadlifts. Calf raises not very fatiguing. Deadlifts obviously more fatiguing. But if I do a set of calf raises into a set of deadlifts, I'm going to have to take a 3-minute rest anyway after the deadlifts, and then I'm pretty fresh for the calf raises, and I got an extra minute for deadlifting. So it's a great way to get a lot of volume in a short amount of time. Also could take advantage of things like myo reps and things like that, which I'm not going to explain right now. Haven't really done those much myself, but I think they could be a way to drive extra volume so I can build some massive biceps this year. Right, Kathleen? Yeah. Okay. Kathleen's in I keep her in a box somewhere in the closet. Okay. All right. And lastly, this kind of rounds off the whole conversation. I have found that there's exists this whole natty purgatory thing, which is very, very frustrating as a natural lifter. So the natty purgatory is that it's kind of a few things. One, when you don't, I was ripped at one point before I'd had any muscle, like after college, senior year of high school. but like you just don't look very good because you don't really look like you have any muscle. Even though you take your shirt off and you have abs, you just look skinny. Even today, right now, like I still think I just kind of look skinny, but I'm a lot less skinny, so I'm pretty okay with how I look at this point, which is cool. But there's this interim period where even if you do have enough muscle and you're overweight, which I was not that long ago, you don't look big anymore because you were just bulked up. Like you filled out all your t-shirts. Literally all of my pants no longer fit me, which is kind of scary. I have a suit that I don't know if it fits, and I literally was able to pull a pair of jeans off my butt. It completely fell to the floor while I had them buttoned, so I don't know if that suit's going to fit. That will be an interesting thing, and I can't try it on till the day before the wedding. So we'll see how that one goes. I will keep you all updated. But you bulk, you fill out all your clothes really nicely, or you're in this interim where you're not cut, you're not really ripped, you're smaller than you were, you don't feel big, and you kind of just look and feel like crap, which a lot of people, including myself, have spent a lot of time to. But if you cut enough to the point where you get shredded, like I'd say sub 12% body fat, depending on the person, depending on where you store your body fat. I sadly store no body fat in my arms and store mostly in like my abs, which is very common for a lot of people. At that point, you look a lot better, especially with your shirt off. So depending on how much muscle you have, you will always look smaller, but with your shirt on. But you like are actually like, okay, I look good. And a lot of people that are natural look, if you see them with a shirt on, it's very disillusioning to how they look with their shirt off, in the sense that they look huge with their shirt on. They're in a pump, in peak lighting, and I think it's kind of, honestly, I'm gonna make a post about this and show like my full transparency. Like I walk around looking very much like a normal person, but if you look at me in peak lighting with a pump at this level of body fat, you'd be like, damn. But people just don't show you that. And a lot of times the lifters that look really insanely ripped are also pretty short, so that means they don't have to put as much muscle on. So for guys like me that are super lanky, and I'm just making excuses here because I'm a little bitch, but you have to put on a lot more muscle mass to create the same illusion and create the same size, right? Because if I want 16-inch arms, I probably have to add 10 pounds more muscle, probably not that much, but to my arms to get the same 16-inch arms if I was 6 inches shorter and had 6 inches shorter arms, because my humerus is now 3 inches shorter. So I can build that much more of a peak that much more easily. So if you are doing those cuts and bulks, which I don't recommend, again, be warned of that. Like there is this like really shitty period where you just don't look good. You don't feel good either. You don't fill out your clothes. There's kind of like no win. But if you get through it, you might actually look good, assuming you have enough muscle. Okay, avoiding and overcoming injuries. There's really two types of injuries in the gym. There's the fluke accident stuff. I herniated a disc in the gym just because I didn't fully rack out the Smith machine, and the bar came crashing down to the ground. My back like wedged under, and I've struggled with that for years. Actually, kind of put it in remission. Like, 5 during college, kind of figured out how to deal with it. But the other type of injury are overuse injuries. So just doing the same thing repetitively and not doing it well. I did this to my shoulder. I think I created a shoulder impingement, which is kind of an ambiguous term for like creating space between the socket of your humerus and your shoulder joints. There's like a little space there, so you can't actually like lift your shoulder up very well. I remember my lacrosse coach just yelling at me like, pick up your lacrosse stick. I'm like, coach, my shoulder is throbbing. And I was just standing there like trying to hold this, like in so much pain. But that was just from, let's say, bad form, but also being an ego, continuing to push the lifts and then not, I guess checking myself, but I just kept getting heavier and heavier, and then my range of motion kept getting smaller, and I didn't really have the form to flip up dumbbells very appropriately. So what I would say to avoid that is, again, look at the range of motion. All you want to do is take the muscle through a full range of motion. There is some arguments is like you're increasing weight. Maybe you don't have to go all the way down, and you can make that a progression. Like that can be your progressive overload instead of increasing reps and weight or sets. You can just overload the range of motion, especially because it can be hard to add 5-pound dumbbells going from like 85s to 90s to 95 to 100s. And it also, like, every exercise is essentially a different exercise every time you add load, because it's changing your center of mass, especially things like free weights, right? Because I at one point bench press 105s, which is awesome, and I was probably at 210 at that point. But it's a lot easier for me to weight down 105-pound dumbbells when I weigh 210 pounds than I weigh at 175 pounds. So did I have more muscle? Possibly, but it's also possible that my leverages were improved to move that much load because I had more weight weighing me down. So that was kind of a roundabout way of saying, making sure you start and stop at the same position every time, unless you're specifically doing intentionally to, increase range of motion over time. And don't do anything stupid. Use a spotter. Make sure you rack the Smith machine. I think I haven't gotten, knock on woody, I haven't gotten injured in the gym seriously, like, in years. There was like one day where I thought I hurt my back in the hack squat, but it was fine after the next day. As long as you are controlling the eccentric, that's a huge thing. Make sure you lower with control, press up as forcefully as you can. There's not a lot of risk in the concentric generally, but making sure you are lowering the weight with control. So that will just help you with your form and everything. Most people, especially when they start, just don't have the coordination to actually control the weight. So they're just throwing the weight up and they kind of just flare everything out on the way up. And then they don't have the coordination to lower it. So they just drop the weight and then catch it with their chest or whatever that is. So focus on controlling that eccentric. That will help you learn the coordination required to safely use these things. Again, the caveat here is that unless you're a numbskull like me, most people aren't going to ego lift their way into injuries. So even if you were just dropping the barbell onto your chest, and I don't mean like literally dropping it, but you're not really controlling the way down, you're using so little load at the start that it doesn't actually matter. So a lot of these things you'll just kind of negate in the process if you aren't a numbskull, as previously mentioned. All right, lastly, here's some myths for you. Just bust. This is just going on and on, so I'll try and round these off pretty quickly. I think I've talked about these before. I used to think the Smith machine doesn't count. Stability is your friend and allows you to change the exercise to you. So if you can alter an exercise to make it better suited to your unique structure and frame, for example, for me, I might be able to squat cleanly one day if I wear squat shoes, if I wear wedges, because that gives me a little bit more artificial ankle mobility, allows my knees to get further over, allows my butt to come down a more vertical path versus the baby giraffe thing that I've mentioned earlier. I might also try low bar squatting. The only reason I would consider doing that is literally for fun, as I mentioned earlier, and I have kind of a cool idea. I think it'd be cool to hit a 1,000-pound powerlifting total and also some other things in the same day. Maybe set a world record or something. We'll see if that ever happens. Probably not, but that would be a very unique world record. I feel like now I have to explain it. All right, so I think it would be cool. One of my goals in life: throw a backflip on a snowboard, sub 3-hour marathon, and 1,000-pound total. I think that would be super insane to do in a day. Oh, and dunk a basketball. All goals of mine. So maybe that's a record. Maybe like 1,000 people have already done that. Probably. I used to think you shouldn't use straps. Most people are gripping barbells and things the wrong way. You only want to use the ends of your fingertips. That was a huge game changer I got from Ben Yanis. Because if you over grip it, your forearm muscles are fighting each other, which doesn't make for a very efficient grip strength. But I used to think that you shouldn't need any assistance, or it's cheating, or like you have a weak grip. And I've had a weak grip for a long time. Now I'm actually working on it because I'm interested in building bigger forearms and just having general more grip strength. But anything there's no way I'll ever be able to deadlift without straps what I could with straps. And even if I could, theoretically, it would take me so long for my grip strength to catch up. Look at these tiny little forearm muscles. You're supposed to say they're big. Compared to my glutes and my hamstrings, which are just going to be able to move a lot more load. So you shouldn't just assume that all of your muscles are going to be equally strong, at least at the same time. So use straps if you need them. Use heel wedges. Make the exercise more suited to you. Don't let something you don't want to be a limiting factor, i.e. your grip when you're trying to train hamstrings, i.e. your ankle mobility when you're trying to train quads. There are no special muscle groups. Calves, abs, they are both dependent on progressive overload, getting stronger in whatever rep range you choose, and the amount of body fat that you have. Obviously, yes, abs are an indication, but so is every other muscle. The more lower body fat you have, the more you see it. Obviously abs don't like hypertrophy in the same way. Like it would be kind of crazy if everyone had a six pack that was like out to here, but you do see like CrossFitters that aren't as lean that just have crazy ab development. So just train them like you would every other muscle group. You don't need to do a 10-minute ab session after your 30 exercise lift like I used to do 7 days a week to get abs. Take them through your full range of motion, control the eccentric and the concentric forcefully, the concentric, the squeezing portion, and overload them over time. I will tell you that I also used to believe that like I just wouldn't be able to grow my calves genetically. And my dad basically at one point sat me down and was like, Tyler, I'll never forget this. He was like, Tyler, you gotta start training calves. It was like getting pretty big, but you gotta start training calves. And I was like, all right, I gotta figure this out. I'm smart enough to figure this out. And that was the answer. The answer was that don't be a little wimp. And you have to train calves. They're like the same thing as everything else. Just prioritize them. Do them first in your workout, which is actually a good tip in general. Like if you hate something, do it first so you just get it over with. I would skip calves and I would skip forearms for the longest time because I would wait till the end where I'm pooped and ugh, I don't want to do forearms. So I'd skip them. But if you just get those over with, they're great to put in the front of your workout, great warm up, not a lot. Or just now after a while, you just start to do them and you don't care. Like actually, and I figured out movements that I enjoy for training forearms and calves where I'm like, oh, I actually enjoy this, which is a great point. Again, going back to that point of like finding exercises you enjoy because you will stick with them. I hated dumbbell forearm curls for the longest time because I thought they felt like shit for me. Found a cable variation with some equipment that I have that you can do. You can do it with a straight bar too. It's not as comfortable. I use they have a plastic thing. It's basically a hanger, and then you can adjust how far you want the grips to be, and then you can rotate the D handles, which makes it very comfortable on my whittle wrists because they're very weak and feeble. And now I actually like training forearms, and that took me a long time to figure out. Toning. I've talked about this one so much. There's no such thing as toning. You have a lot less muscle than you think. If you want a certain muscle group to appear more lean, you need more muscle there and you need less body fat there. So that means train to get stronger and train the rest of you, lose some body fat to get leaner. I could talk about my gripe with mobility training, but it's kind of too long of a conversation. So we'll share that. Ben Giannis had some similar thoughts that were interesting recently on his YouTube. So go check that out if you want to see it. Maybe I'll link it. And then body fat percentage calculators are BS. They kind of don't matter, but they're a good reference to have. I don't think you should bother with a DEXA scan or anything like that. They're basically a vanity metric, but sometimes a vanity metric is useful. You could also just use waist percentage, but chasing a body fat percentage I think is dumb. You'll probably get over that as you get older. But I also recently hit like sub 10% body fat, and I thought that was kind of cool. So maybe I am just hypocritical. And lastly, supplements don't do shit. Maybe creatine does like very marginal thing, but it's like I don't even see any benefit from creatine. I'm probably gonna stop taking it and paying for it because I don't feel like I see any benefit. If I stop it and see any benefit, I'll report back and say I'm a liar. But I used to work for a supplement company. You can buy pump supplements. You can buy pre-workouts. You can spend hundreds of dollars a month on supplements. All you need, in my opinion, is a nice coffee pre-workout. Get yourself going, get some carbs in there, maybe some milk, get some protein, and carbs. It's really the only thing I need. Again, maybe creatine. You can make an argument for protein if you really need it, but like it shouldn't be that hard to get protein from your diet. And if that's a diet issue, if you're struggling to get protein from your diet. So I don't really think any supplements are going to make any significant difference. The pump supplements make you feel like you're lifting a lot more, but they don't really seem to do anything in terms of actual long-term muscle growth. There's really no evidence that any supplements at this point, besides creatine having a marginal effect, slightly increase muscle growth. So I would probably just not waste your time. All right, everyone. It's late. I got to get this out for tomorrow. So I will see you guys soon. Appreciate anyone who made it this far. If you have made it this far, drop me a comment and let me know what you think. We'll be back with Kathleen soon, and I think we're going to do an episode on peating basics, which is my nutrition side of things. Wow, I can't believe I talked for an hour. Well, till next time, guys. Be good.